when I was asked to do this, I thought about, I'm going to come down here and wing it. No, PowerPoints are better, at least give you something to hang on to. I was looking, I never have PowerPoints with good imagery like some people I know, like Don Lee, who some of you may know. So I was looking for images on the web, and I was looking agritourism imagery, and I ran across this one. I thought, that's funny, but it's only funny to me because when I saw this horse, I thought to myself, Mr. Red. How many people thinking agritourism saw that picture and thought, Mr. Red? Right? Mr. Red was a television show in the 60s about a talking horse. And I thought to myself, how funny, I'm going to amuse myself here at least. If we could figure out how to teach horses to talk, we would have this agritourism thing. Next one. What are we talking about when we talk about a policy or regulatory framework? Well, as you most probably know, states like California, everywhere, require local jurisdictions to have a general plan. It requires to have zoning. As part of all that, there are permitting and land use approvals that go into what we call the stew of oversight or regulation by counties. There are also things like the Williamson Act, which promote agriculture or agricultural land preservation by giving you reduced taxes, but they also come with some hitches, and they mean certain things depending on your contract. Williamson Act takes too long. I'm going to ask everyone if they have questions about it. I'll try to hang around and network with you. I really like the interaction I saw earlier. So I'm going to try and hang around as long as I can today. But these are the basic fingers and toes of regulatory frameworks. Next. I'm going to focus on just one area. I'm going to keep narrowing down a little bit. We're going to focus on agricultural areas and zones. Agricultural uses are allowed in all general plan designations, all areas of the county that we have land use permitting for. For this workshop, I'm going to focus down even further on our A zones, which are agriculture zones, or as they're often called exclusive agriculture zones, but I've always joked they're not really that exclusive, how the state and others would like to think of them, because many agricultural zones that are exclusive ag zones don't allow homes, and we do. All right. Agritourism is an interesting subject because up until the 90s, many zoning regulations or zoning ordinances throughout the state didn't have the term. People didn't know what was evolving. They didn't know what was coming online in terms of what people were trying to do. So our zoning ordinance, we don't update it constantly, thank God, but we do update it from time to time. And in the 90s, we realized we wanted to revise and look at our A-zone regulations, and that was the first time we introduced this term and its a use, agritourism in the A-zone. In 2003, we revised the whole zoning ordinance, and we gave it a new term because agritourism, I guess, didn't mean enough to everybody. Ag-related entertainment and commercial uses. Next. So here are some excerpts from our general plan that show only our agricultural areas as they're designated in the county. Up at the top, you can see the San Jose Urban Service Area, the middle part of Coyote Valley, then you have the lower part of Coyote Valley, which is ag medium and ag large scale. These largely have to do with parcel sizes and what's allowed. And you can see the two main areas in the Morgan Hill sphere of influence. The blue is the sphere of influence. These are the two main areas the county's designated ag still. Next slide. Then we have the area we've focused here on the Gilroy sphere of influence in the area to the Watsonville Road corridor. Most of this area is large-scale ag, and it's the area where we still have the largest parcels. Next. Agritourism is an allowable use. Zoning ordinances do things like you think of biological taxonomy. We classify uses so that we can understand what we're differentiating them from in terms of knowing should we regulate them or should we not. Agritourism is an allowed use. It became something we promote throughout the history of this county in terms of promoting agriculture. That's part of our general plan. They're different in a way, which you've heard about, from strict agriculture, but it's consistent with our general plan to allow supportive uses and those that contribute to ag viability. Within the definition we allow a variety of uses. It's set up that way. So being zoning administrator, I have flexibility actually to classify uses as allowable within this classification, so that's good. The current definition, I'll show you, the zoning classification does provide flexibility, but right now, it was only introduced and allowed in our A zones. We'll probably be changing that soon. I don't know how soon, but that's another matter. Next. Long definitions, commercial visitor-oriented services, sales, attractions with an agricultural theme conducted in conjunction with some type of on-site ag use. These things can be food, retail sales, tasting rooms, receptions, outdoor entertainment areas. And next slide. I labeled this one, added the fine print because there's more to the use regulation or use allowance than just the definition. There's certain things that we're also trying to achieve to conserve farmland, not interfere with the ag operation that's on site, and that will help provide positive marketing for the county. Now the bad news. Okay. In the history of the zoning ordinance for this county, basically all uses were broken down into two types of use classes. One was things allowed by right. You didn't need a type of permit for them, or use permits. Going back into the 30s when the zoning ordinance was first created. And use permits were basically conceived of as a way of balancing public and private interests. You want to do X, does your neighbor, does the area, does the jurisdiction have an interest in seeing how you go about using that the property for that purpose, and does it have an impact on others? And the use permit process is one that was created years ago to provide for due process for all. It's a public hearing, etc. The bad news, and the thing we've been evaluating over the last 10 or 15 years, is that over time the cost of use permits has gone up and up and up. The cost to someone who wants to do something that requires the use permit has gone up and up and up. What have we done instead? Like with wineries, we've tried to look at how we can reduce the permitting requirements so it's not always a use permit, and that's key. Well, I just touched on some of these things. We're evaluating through a use permit process, whether it's for agritourism or for a winery or something that requires a use permit. We're looking at suitability of the location. These all go to findings. These are legal requirements. We're looking at compatibility with neighbors. You've heard about that already. That's key. If you require architecture and site approval, this governs where you put things on your property and whether or not you have enough parking, water supply, and other things. The other thing is subject to the Environmental Quality Act for California because it's a discretionary approval. So we've got to look at the traffic impact of things. If you were actually generating 7,000 trips a day, it's pretty significant. You can't exactly overlook it. Neighbors that don't like it could actually sue the county or stop you, as we've heard. So we do have an obligation under the law, as well as our own policies, to look at what the impacts of something could be. As I mentioned also, the Planning Commission is the granting authority for a use permit, and it does involve a public hearing. Next. There are other related ag uses I wanted to mention. We have agriculture per se. This is raising of animals and crops. There are ag accessory uses and structures. We allow ag processing, at least since the 90s in this county, which is also referred to as vertical integration, taking out the middleman processors. Ag sales is a variety of things. You pick operations, farm stands, up to and including farmers markets where many people could come together, develop a use, and actually sell on site, whether you have ag on site or not. So last. Trends and observations. From my perspective, I've been with the county since 1989. I skipped right over my story to get to slides here. I'm originally from North Carolina, Eastern North Carolina. Family had farms. I've worked on farms. Actually, I was slave labor because my dad wanted me to go out there and do these things to help out. So I've done a lot of different things besides cleaning ditches, picking up eggs, weeding 40 acres of corn and soybeans. I've never hated jumping over hills of rows of crops more in my life. It's 14 and 90-degree heat in the summer in North Carolina. Pick cucumbers, did all those things. So, know something about what it takes. Actually, I just want to let you know that it's something you have to do to appreciate, just like digging ditches. And that's part of my background. These days, where I sit, we don't get a lot of buzz from people who are interested, but we are interested. There are not that many agritourism commercial uses historically in this county. We'd like to see more. We think there's some interest that's growing, and this is evidence of it. In the past, though, we've seen people with more grandiose ambitions. Has anybody ever heard of the Vintner Showcase proposal back to the 90s? Jeff Martin had some property in San Martin, got it designated in the general plan for such a use, had a combination of things he wanted to try to create that would promote interest in agriculture. The Vintner Showcase was to highlight local wineries and wines, have a farmer's market, tourism uses. That was in the day, I think it was ahead of its time in a sense. And it didn't happen. He got all his entitlements essentially, and but couldn't do it. More recently, I think we've been focusing on wineries to promote agritourism, but as part, if you go to our website, we have a web page on agritourism. The county has an interest in promoting agritourism. We ended up starting with wineries. It took a couple of years to work through some regulatory changes and a task group of vintners that we worked with. But my main ultimate message is we're interested in dialogue. I'm here to learn from you as much and what your interests are, the other presenters, so that we can evolve our policy and regulatory framework. What you're seeing in this presentation really is it's kind of fixed, it's kind of narrow. It's only in agritourism is only allowed right now as a permitted use in A zones. We're looking at expanding its allowability and looking at how we can provide for those opportunities, especially as a small scale, as you start things, as much by right as possible. That's the general trend. So you wouldn't have to come to the county and say, do I need a use permit? And then hence we get into a 30-minute discussion about all that it costs, how much time it takes, and you walk away and say, I could never do that. You know, but that's actually the most important thing that we can say is that, you know, just as in 1998 when the county first really instituted agritourism, regulation happens as a snapshot of an evolving picture of use, people's interests in time, but we don't reevaluate and revise our regulations every year. So this is another opportunity for us, and that's one of the reasons I'm here, is to take stock, talk to the Farm Bureau, talk to the folks who are doing it, look at the size and scale of their operations. What does it mean to potentially make the most allowance we can for these uses without regulating, without overburdening? And then look at the ones that potentially have the greatest impact and decide, well, what is the lightest touch? If we do need to regulate, what's the lightest touch we can have? And that's one of the reasons I became a planner, is that I wanted to actually, I'm not, like I said, I started in advanced planning, doing the general plan, long-range policy. We try as much as we can to find ways to promote agriculture in this county, despite all the countervailing trends, you know, over 50 years of suburbanization, sprawl, and everything else has happened in this county. So thank you for your time and attention. I'm probably over time, sorry. But I'm also going to stick around if you have particular questions and you don't want to ask them here, you know, in a give and take. I'm going to try and stick around and network. I hope that was somewhat useful, and if you didn't understand all the stuff, I'll talk to you.
There are time for a few questions if anybody would like to ask a question directly.
Sure.
We're concerned in the property doing something like this is a city park. We have a historic barn that we're trying to save, and we're expanding that into an agritourism scenario. How involved does the county be involved in that since it's a city park?
Is it also in the city of Gilroy proper?
Yes.
I thought so. Yeah, because I know some red barns in the area, but I didn't know if I was thinking of the same one that you're here representing. If it's in the city and it's in city property, the city has total, complete governance. The county has no role.
How about operations if we wanted to do, say, food?
Segue. the county as a oversight body does have roles that the city does not have when it comes to food and food service and things like that. Mark will speak to that.
Farm stays, do you have farm stays in your regulations at this point?
There are proposals to look at how we might accommodate farm stays by that term, but not presently. You can have a bed and breakfast on your property through a use permit process for up to 6 rooms, things like that. It's a very historical regulation. Farm stays are an evolving concept, but it gets real complicated beyond just deciding that you're going to allow them. It gets quite complicated within a variety of building code, fire code, all those types of things. But farm stays are an interesting concept that we'd like to promote.
I just wanted to point out that Yolo County is going through their process, and one of the few things that they did change to allow by right was the farm stays.
Yes. And I think we could go in that direction. Sometimes counties and cities look at what each other are doing because someone's got to be first. And so you learn from what others are trying to do, simplify things. And farm stays, whether they're yurts, or tent cabins or something like that, they're of interest. Yes. Yes, sir.
How does having a bed and breakfast with just like 1 or 2 rooms, how complicated are the regulations for that for on a farm?
Probably too complicated presently for someone to want to try to do. Within an individual home, there's already an allowance to rent for up to 1 to 2 quarters. But as a commercial operation where people are coming and going for a farm stay, takes it out of that definition. Something we're going to be looking at, trying to figure out what's the easiest way for someone to be able to have a family come stay or something in time.
Where's the overlap between a B&B and what you were just describing?
Agritourism, as a definition, could be inclusive of somebody who wants to run a bed and breakfast, but historically what we've seen in this county is very, very few. It's just not Napa, where the demand is so great for weekend tourism accommodation. We've seen a couple of bed and breakfasts over the years. We actually have provision to allow for them more easily within a historic property as what's called reuse. But historic farm home or something like that, that's an interesting question. B&Bs are a little complicated in terms of getting approvals for them. Not just, I'll get right to you, but one of the key things is, when you're in rural areas, you're on your on-site wastewater system or septic system. And so everything you try to do, it has a domino effect in terms of the improvements and costs that come along with that. So it can be daunting that way. And I have a hand here and a hand there.
Is it possible to still enter into a Williamson contract
Yes.
for new property acquisitions?
Williamson Act is still supported by the county and it's still very possible to enter into it. We have people in our office as well as the assessor's office who can help you with inquiries about that. I'll come back to you.
Quick question about commercial kitchens. Does that fall under your bidding or
Next.
do you need to have a use permit for that? Or do you have to be zoned for that? Or?
Probably offline talk about how differently we look at those things. A commercial kitchen mainly falls under the regulation of environmental health, but the use of the land or whatever you're trying to do, falls under planning. Whether you really want a commercial kitchen, that effort is an interesting question. I'm over time probably now. There's one more question.
I went to an NPC ABAG meeting up in Oakland last year. They said that they were looking to reduce the amount of Williamson Act permits that they were issuing or would start revoking some of them. Are you able to comment on that?
The State Department of Conservation, I'll be happy to talk with you more. The State Department of Conservation audited the county's Williamson Act program in the mid-2000s. Came down pretty hard. The because we had a lot of properties that weren't in compliance, which means they didn't generate farm income, or they didn't actually have an agricultural use of one thing or another. So that has happened. They're not really permits, they're contracts. And at times we've had to actually issue what's called a non-renewal, because sorry, we've got to keep you out of the contract because you've never had ag and you don't have ag, and that's a prerequisite. But we've gone through that. We now have a pretty stable number of contracts where we have dependable agricultural use. We meet all our state requirements. So if you can show that you're able to qualify for Williamson Act, we'd be happy to talk and enter into that. There is for prime land, there's a 10-acre minimum, there's some other criteria, but we do still encourage that. We're not trying to find ways to get rid of those. Some jurisdictions are, because the subventions and the money they get back from the state, they don't think is worth it. And actually what you can help tell our Board of Supervisors is that you're still interested, even if it takes effort. Even if this county has to make extra effort to stay with the Williamson Act program, that it's worth it to you. It's worth it to planning as well. All right, I'm done for now, but I'm going to stick around and happy to hear what other people have to say and talk with you later. Thank you so much.
Bill, be so accessible. So let's welcome Martha Ween with Santa Clara County Environmental Health Department, where she's a supervisor, and so I think she's the person who will really be able to address many of your questions about cooking, on-site food preparation, tasting, sampling, all that sort of thing. So thank you so much.
So I work for the Department of Environmental Health, and within that department, we actually are under the umbrella of AEM, Agriculture Environmental Management, and then this Department of Environmental Health. And then within that, we have Consumer Protection Division, the Hazmat Compliance Division, and our Vector Control District, and we all fit under environmental health. Today, I'm just going to speak to you mostly about the Consumer Protection Division, because that's where all the food laws reside and all our work that's going to be most important to you. So go ahead. So some of the bigger programs that we have under consumer protection is our retail food sales, that's number one. And then we oversee the drinking water, recreation health, which is our public swimming pools, land use, the septic systems, when you're building a house, when you're remodeling and doing things. Detention center or facilities, those are jails, we don't have too many out here. Homeless shelters, childhood lead poisoning, noise, and tobacco. So our biggest program, and I think of most interest to all of you, is our retail food program. And what we're looking at, and what we're mandated by the law to do, is to look at the design and your processes. And over the years, the way we look at food facilities has changed from more of a structural review to more looking at the processes and the risks that are associated with the types of foods and the processes that are occurring. So some of the things that in our food retail stands, and these are just some of them, anywhere there's food, we're usually involved. But the mobile food, cars and trucks, schools, grocery stores, temp event booths, farm stands, cottage food operations, that's new to the state. That's been about a year that the state started allowing cottage food operations where you can do home prepared foods. And then certified farmers markets. So I'll just go through briefly some of these real fast. The drinking water, basically we're looking at when someone's building a house and they are going to be using the water for drinking purposes, that we'll do, we have to give clearance to make sure that they can provide potable water. Land use, that's where if you're out in this area, you're usually on a septic system, and that's what we do, and that's primarily my job, is I oversee the staff that are doing the on-site septic systems, as well as food and pools, but primarily the land use. So we just had new ordinance that just passed in December, and where we can now start using alternative systems and some of the sizings for parcels and requirements have changed. The alternate systems are a big deal in the county because for years we weren't allowed to use alternate systems, so that prevented some development. So now that's allowed. Noise complaints, we have a few noise complaints. Our noise program is just complaint driven, so if you are having people, weddings and stuff like that, it's usually just on a complaint basis, and if someone exceeds, and then we'll just deal with that. Okay, a little bit what I'm going to talk today is more to the farm stands, retail stands, cottage foods, winery, temp events, certified farmers markets, and mobiles. I'll just give you a brief overview. So more recently, we have the difference between farm stands and then food retail stands. So a food retail stand is exempt from permitting, and that's when you've got a site on your property or in control of you where you can sell your produce, whole produce, and your eggs. And it doesn't have to be your property, it just has to be the property that you control. And there's no permitting there. Okay, the farm stands is where it does require a permit, and this is a new program that started with the state in about 2009. They do have to have a local permit, and you can sell a limited amount of snacks, prepackaged foods, and then unlimited amounts of value-added foods. And they're non-PHFs. I mean, for people that don't know what PHF is, it's potentially hazardous foods. So those are like cooked foods, meats, cheeses. Those are considered potentially hazardous foods. Non-potentially hazardous foods are more like crackers, dried fruits, things like that aren't going to spoil. The potentially hazardous foods are usually the type of foods that are keep in your refrigerator, or an easy way to say it. So for the requirements for the snack foods, they have to be non-PHFs, they have to be from an approved source, and approved source means it has to be able, you got it at a store, you got it from a cottage food operation, or some type of source that was approved. Has to have proper labeling, and you're limited to 50 square feet of storage and sales areas. For the value-added foods, those would be like your jams and jellies. Those, you want to look at, it could be like your neighbor's farm made the jellies and you're selling them. You can have that there under the permit. Again, it has to be an approved source, so it also will have to be prepared in an approved facility. And we'll go through that. And then later. Farm stands are quite different than a local restaurant where you don't have to have floors and walls, you don't have to have plumbing, and you don't even need the connection to approved septic tank. But you do have to provide bathrooms and have, be able to wash your hands. And you need to just ensure that your food is protected from contamination. That's what our biggest concern is adulteration or something that's going to affect the food. And so you need to store your foods in a vermin-proof. So if you have an open stand, you want to have some place where you can keep them so that the rats don't touch your body. And then no live animals are allowed within 20 feet. The only type of food preparation that is allowed at a farm stand would be sampling. So to be able to offer samples, so you want someone to taste your fruit or whatever, then you have to have a written protocol on how you're going to do this. This is really a simple task. It's not a big, long, lengthy document. It's just something that's going to let us know what your procedures are for hand washing, cleaning the fruit, and that type of stuff. And then you have to have a toilet within 5 minutes close by. You got to have, the basics And I know some people kind of go, that's common sense, but sometimes it's not so common sense when you see some of the operations that we see. So, we need, clean bathrooms, some place to wash their hands, utensil washing, to wash your knives and things like that. And then a place to throw your garbage and all your close by amenities to kind of protect you. If you're going to sell some type of value-added foods like jams and jellies, they do have to come from an approved source. And so if you're, depending on the type of food that you're doing, it will determine. If you're going to be doing jams and jellies, and it's a high acid food, you're going to be able to go maybe under a cottage food law permit, and that would be an approved source. Or if you went to making some foods that are lower acid, that would be more like your chutneys and things like that, then you would probably need to go to the state to get a processing permit. And that's just some of the stuff. If it, like I said, it's low acid foods, there's higher potential of botulism, so the state will usually actually get a license through that. Cottage foods operations, that's a newer permit that just came through, and I think, and it's helping a lot of folks. It allows you to prepare home foods, and they're usually low risk, non-potentially hazardous foods, your baked goods, your jams and jellies that are high in acid. I brought some handouts on how to obtain a permit. Usually it's based on the income from this process, and then that if you're over, like for this year, 45,000, then you need to go to a commercial kitchen. So it's to help the smaller folks be able to provide the foods at a reasonable cost. So there's two types of cottage food operations, and they're both annual permits, and I'm not going to read through all of that, but the biggest thing, Class A, is that you won't have an inspection. You submit a check sheet and all the information to our department. You get issued a permit. Also labeling, and we look at the labels very thoroughly because you have to have everything organized. And then you submit it to our department. And the biggest thing is that you're more for direct sales. So you can go to the farmer's market and sell the process. You can go to bazaars, places like that. You can't sell it to Whole Foods and then sell and allow them to sell. You can do that with your Class B. And you usually, if you get a Class B permit, then you usually get one inspection, and we'll just kind of go through you can sell to a store that can then sell it out if that's the type of operation if you want. So a lot of times, if you have a farm stand, and you may be able to sell at your cottage foods. I know some wineries were looking at that stuff too. So. Wineries, they're exempt from having to have an environmental health permit, but they serve water, soda, wine, and crackers. That's the only food that they're allowed to serve without a permit. And then they're also allowed 25 square feet of prepackaged, non-potentially hazardous foods. And then if there's any food preparation occurring, then they need to get a permit. So other ways that you can go about selling foods, certified farmers markets that you're growing. If you're growing the produce and eggs. We have certified farmers markets. There's, I think, close to 40 of them around in the county now. I had that program for a couple years. It's kind of part in ag, where if you're going to be a certified farmers market, but if you're going to be a seller of foods, the producers go actually under the certified farmers market permit, and then there are some folks that are on the other side, and those are the ones that might be selling the cottage foods, things like that.
Have the Ag Commissioner here today with us as well, so you can ask some of those questions.
Ag big in it. And then the AB 224, which is allowing more CSAs And that falls under the ag commissioner and the ag side for the approvals. Temporary event permits. So let's say you're having a function out on your farm, but you don't want an annual permit, you are just going to do an occasional function, then we can go with what we call a temporary permit, and that's where, you know, you set up a tent. It's all based on what you're doing and what you're selling. And so say it's going to be a weekend event and you're going to be doing something, then you can go with a temporary event permit and do food preparation, or if it's prepackaged foods or something like that, then you may not even necessarily need a permit, but if there's any food preparation, you usually do, and you'll come out and get inspections. And usually those permits, you know, they're supposed to, you know, it's along with an event that's happening. So it's not just a food stuff, you're just selling food, but if you're having some type of festival or some tour or something like that, then you could bring in the temp event booths. What a lot of folks do now is the food trucks. That's the big craze right now, to kind of bring the food into an event where, you know, because you want to bring people to your site, but you also want to be able to provide some food. So what a lot of people are doing are bringing in the food trucks. We see them park all over, and or the carts. And those are permitted in the county, and they're allowed to go anywhere in the county. So they can come out, you can have someone come out to your event and have a truck. Just want to make sure the permit is valid and sell the food, and then you don't have to worry about getting any additional permitting. So my contact information is here, and I just want to say our department really does want to help encourage people to be involved and ask questions. We're not out looking for who's doing what and, you know, chasing around with our red light. We want to be able to have you guys approach us. I left a bunch of my business cards there. Email me, call me, just ask me questions. We really would want to find a way that you can do things, and with as little oversight as possible. I mean, we understand that. So if you can, just give me a call.
So if I wanted to teach cooking classes on my farm, what would that fall under?
You can eat the food that you're going to cook.
Eventually, yeah.
No, I don't think it would be. See, so if you're having a private event, you're having a wedding, or I don't believe even a cooking class. If you're not, if you're giving or selling food away, you have to have, you know, to the public. You're having a private event at your home, then you don't need a permit.
Well, if it's part of like a series of classes I'm teaching and people are paying, and they're going to come and they're going to, you know, learn how to make jam, or they're going to learn how to make bread, and then they're going to taste what they cooked.
I don't think you need a permit.
Good answer.
Constantly, I will go back and ask but I don't think you need a permit, because it's a private event, and so you don't need that.
My understanding, and maybe you could correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding of a private event from the guidance we've received from DEH is that it's an event basically by invitation only. So someone coming in off the street couldn't just come in. Whereas in Lisa's instance, anybody who brings their $20 or whatever it is could come in. It's not necessarily by invitation only. So it'd be helpful to get some
Clarity, yeah.
get some information, some clarification on that.
You know, the community centers often will have classes for making, or not for making.
I have a question about farm stands. You said that you can sell an unlimited quantity of value-added products that could maybe come from your neighbor or someone in close proximity. So then can you also sell produce from your neighbor in close proximity at your farm stand?
I believe so. I will double check on that, but I'm pretty sure you can.
Okay, thank you. That would be good to know if that's
I think it's a lot of the goals is to keep things local, just like with the farmers markets. You know, you want to keep, it's a direct marketing to get to support.
And some counties limit farmers to selling only their own produce.
Now, with the retail food stand, field stand, it has to be your own. But I will double check on that. That wasn't in the training.
It would be interesting to know.
What was the category before farm stand? Is it produce?
It's a
Field.
retail food stand. It's a new term that came out in 2009 because it used to be a produce stand. Now they call them retail food stands. So
And
you
that's the
have,
one that you don't have to have a permit for?
you do not have to have a permit.
But there's a size limitation. I know that you have that on your website, I think, on the Ag Commission's website.
Yeah, we actually worked with, I believe, a few years ago, we put together a flyer, and this flyer is basically set up to help you how to do it without getting a permit.
Okay.
So kind of go through here. Because there's other things in the in the ag world, you know, the scales and all that stuff. So this is a really good handout for the farm stands.
Other question?
And I put a handout, the guidelines for the cottage food. And that, there's a lot of information on our website. And like I said, I left my card. You can call me, and I don't always have the answers up here, but I can always get the answers. And it's important to ask because a lot of times you don't know, and if it's a simple answer, or even if it's a hard answer, we'd like to get we want to know too often, and so we want to find the answers, and sometimes we have to go up to the state to find the answers because we're mandated for this program, so we have to follow the state laws. So it also allows us to, if we have a lot of people calling in about a particular subject, areas that we want to look at more closely.
Martha, thank you so very much. Let's thank Martha. And I wanted to mention that we also have Joe DeVinny here with the Ag Commissioner for Sanitary County, and Athena Pratt with the NRCS office locally in Hollister, two other terrific resources for other questions that you may have, and you may want to talk with them at lunchtime. So regulations are clearly an important part of this, and so is insurance and managing your risk. So we're fortunate to have with us today Eric Isaacson with Inner West Insurance, and he'll tell you a little bit about the different kinds of insurance that you need or might want to consider. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Sabella. I'm going to try to make this kind of quick. I had quite a bit of preparation here, and I was going to rattle off a bunch of numbers and statistics to you, but realize that that really isn't important. From an insurance standpoint, well, let me start by saying that I've really enjoyed this so far. My family is a fourth generation Santa Clara Valley family. We've been involved in agriculture in one way or another that whole time. And I think that it's kind of neat here. I was talking to Brent earlier that this agriculture has come full circle. Originally, somebody decided or figured out that they could plant a seed, cultivate it, and get some food to feed themselves. Then they realized that they could maybe plant a little more and trade it for some other type. And then we decided that we needed to feed the world, which we do. And now we're getting back to that local food stand and kind of working together within the community. And I think it's a really neat deal. Getting back to, I guess I should say too, Inner West Insurance is who I work for. We are about the 45th largest insurance brokerage company in the United States. We have offices throughout Northern California. The office that I work out of is in Hollister. That is the furthest south office. Our main, we handle any type of commercial exposures, but the main focus or the largest book of business that we have is in agriculture. So hopefully I'm qualified to talk about this. I hope that somebody has some questions that stump me, because that might make me sweat, so that's good. Anyhow, as far as the insurance industry looks upon agritainment or agritourism, the definition is, agritainment is defined as a farm-related activity regardless of whether a fee is charged, that takes place on a property where farming normally occurs, and which is designed for recreational, entertainment, or educational purposes. So, really, the way that they look at it is that anything that is used for those things that I talked about that is different and not normal to farming is considered agri-tainment. There's two types of policies that are used for farms. One of them is a farm liability policy, and that can be used in a lot of different ways and applied to a lot of different operations. Now, the thing about that is that you will have coverage for anything that is for a normal farming operation. Okay, so it's kind of limited in the sense that if you had a jump house there, for instance, and you had a loss, they would say, "Was that for normal farming operation?" Well, it's not. Okay, if you get into a larger situation where maybe you do have a pumpkin patch or you're doing some agritourism, I would strongly suggest that you get a commercial general liability policy. Typically, that's what we like to use unless it's just a very small, not much of any other exposures in farming. We would use a commercial general liability, and that's going to cover all your commercial exposures. On a lot of these policies, the commercial general liability, we're going to want to explain every exposure that you have. Some of the commercial general liability policies, I'm going to use CGL, it's quicker and easier to say, they will have exclusions to certain things. Agritourism is something that is relatively new. Companies that underwrite or carriers that handle agriculture exposures are comfortable with a lot of different things. They're comfortable with pesticides, fertilizers, men working in conjunction with machinery, four-wheeler ATVs. They're comfortable with that. They are not comfortable with agritourism because that poses different exposures to them. There are companies that are comfortable with those types of exposures, and they're not comfortable with the agricultural exposures. So we, in the insurance industry, have to try to fuse these things together. There's things that you can do. I heard we were talking about social media earlier. The panel was. I think the most important thing that I could get across today is that you should work with a broker who you're comfortable with and who you don't have a problem explaining what your situation is and what you're doing, what your exposures are. I know for me, I would encourage you to ask your agent or your broker, come out and see what we're doing. And that will spur conversation and let the broker get a handle on what you're doing. Be full disclosure and let the broker determine what they're going to tell the carrier. Okay. So many times you might have an adversarial relationship with your broker, and that's really not beneficial. I know for me and most people in the industry, I cannot provide cover for an exposure that I don't know is going on. And the biggest nightmare that I would have is for you to call me up with a claim and me tell you, geez, you don't have coverage for that. So that's one thing that I think is very, very important. The way that the insurance industry works is that a broker is on your side, and he is representing you in a marketplace. There's going to be half a dozen markets that are going to be attracted to what you're doing. And he is going to pitch a case or provide information to them and hopefully get you the coverage that you need at the best possible price. So I'm using a lot of words to say just full disclosure and let your agent work that out. There's a lot of things that I heard earlier, or some things that I heard earlier that are pertinent to the insurance and the liability of things. One of the things is if you are going to do some agritourism, and let's say you have an outside vendor, like she was talking earlier about a food truck. When that food truck gets onto your property or you're negotiating with them how that's going to work, you should request an additional certificate of insurance. And that's where he would name you for that day or the time that he's going to be there on his insurance policy. That's called transferring liability. So now, instead of you assuming the risk, he's assuming the risk. That's one way to attack things. I thought the other thing that was interesting, we talked about social media. I talked about that earlier, and that kind of reminded me of a situation that happened to me, is that I went and met with a prospective client, and I filled out the application and thought I had all the information that he had given me, and insurance carriers check social media because he was doing things that he did not tell me about that they found out through websites and Facebook and that kind of stuff. So just be upfront. Again, let me just review my notes here real quick. I know it's getting towards lunch. I think one of the other things that was touched upon today that is also can be useful in getting coverage is to have certain controls, warning signs, hire quality employees, use good communication within those employees, and also to separate ages of children. You know, don't have the teenagers mingling with the young ones. Obviously, they get pretty rambunctious at these deals and could run over each other. The other thing too is like kind of some of the exposures that have been the carriers are afraid of is petting zoos. We all like petting zoos, and they're great. But as we all know, young kids sometimes put things into their mouths that they shouldn't, and there's been some E. coli contamination. So that's things in, if you're going to have a petting zoo, that's going to be one of the things that's going to be an issue. You're going to have to get over that hurdle. A lot of these things that I've spoke about tonight are hurdles, and you can get over them. Most CGL, commercial general liability policies, do have endorsements that you can add to cover most of the exposures that we've talked about from an insurance standpoint today. It will take some explanations and some research, but generally, I have not found one that they wouldn't cover except for trains. They do not like trains at pumpkin patches. So in that instance, we go to a substandard market and we get coverage that way. And other than that, I'll take a few questions if you guys have any. Yes?
Does your insurance company, by chance, donate to volunteer fire departments to help fund that?
Not that I'm aware of. Yes?
I had a question from a grower one time who was interested in, they're considering moving just from their trees and their farm stand to a U-pick operation, and it seemed like the insurance differences actually weren't that high. Do you know if that's the case? Is U-pick a lot higher risk and the premiums go up, or not necessarily?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. The biggest risk that would be there would be the liability coverage. somebody getting hurt while they're picking. Somebody climbing a tree and falling out.
Use of ladders, yeah.
Right, right. Yes.
I just would add, I've heard a lot of U-Picks, of course, don't know my ladders.
Yeah.
Stay with work, Tuesday, berries.
Yes.
Is it to be expected that if I were working with a broker, that they would provide me with a list of, for sure, these are things that you need to do for, say, a U-Pick or pumpkin patch, you know, the signage, is that a normal practice, or do you have to kind of pry it out of your broker?
Here we go with that adversary relationship. If you called me up and you said, I am going to do a U-Pick situation, then it's my responsibility to pry the information out of you. So I can present your case to a carrier, okay? But it's also very good if you voluntarily, you know, provide me with the information. I mean, we're going to have a conversation, and I'm pretty sure that I'm going to get most everything that I need out of you. It may not be in a list form.
I was just wondering, because it seems like there should be some way to know that these are the typical claims that we get from these situations. So these are the ways, you know, the typical standard.
Right. We're
recommendations.
gonna go over most of that.
Just very quickly, as a tour operator, we are covered and we are having commercial insurance, and then in terms of transferring insurance, say if we have a group of people covered to us, we bring them and have a U-Pick over, then whatever happens is going to be something that can be transferred to.
You know, I didn't get all that.
Tour bus, tour bus bringing
Tour bus,
business.
yes.
If the question is that if a tour bus brings people to you,
And we are covered, can that insurance be transferred to the?
What kind of coverage what kind of insurance does the tour operator need?
they should have an general liability insurance policy as well. And that's what I was saying earlier. You could transfer the exposure to them by requesting them to say, look, I really want you to come out and visit, but I need you to provide me with an additional insured certificate. Did I answer your question?
She's talking the other way around.
The other way around, yeah. So
Yeah.
we have the insurance and we are coming and visiting.
She's the tour bus person coming to our place.
Oh, okay.
If I can, I have a Zine. What you do is get the Accord document, and basically forward it on to them. The Accord document should say that they're covered for that. So you could actually add them, like the San Francisco Airport, for example, you can add them, or you can get it. Lots of policies will have a general liability that you can put in there. A lot of film companies do this, and they'll send you an Accord document that shows you that you're part of your insurance policy. So if you're renting them a vehicle, or if you're going to be on their property, or you're going to be part of the film, it's covered. So they'll send, so it will be one of the Accord documents you can get from your insurance company and give it to them before you arrive, so they have it. And then it's all covered. Okay?
Are you asking if the farm should provide you with a certificate?
No, the other way around.
Okay, the other way around.
Yeah, the other way around.
And help to arrange for having all that information.
Yes.
I just want to point out a resource to people. There's a website put together by the National Center for Children's Agricultural Health and Safety. It's called Safe Agritourism. So Google or look up Safe Agritourism. They have all kinds of guidance for how to do your risk management plan, how to set up your children's play area, how to do fences, how to set up hand wash stations. It's a really good site. A lot of walkthroughs and checklists and ways to deal with setting up safely for your.
And also, some insurance companies will assist you in that. We have loss control people that if you request, we can send them out there and they will help you set up your facility. Yes,
How about waivers? So we actually operate a small agricultural park, and we require all students who come to visit, or any visitors, sign waivers. So how much water does a waiver hold?
Well, that all depends on how big the loss is. they're a hurdle, but they can get got through. Really, the cheapest insurance out there is liability insurance. It's not as expensive as you might think.
Is it a good idea for people to have waivers for folks? I mean, is it something?
Yes, but it's a hurdle. And it all depends on what the exposure is. I mean, if it's one of those bungee jumping, yeah, you're probably going to want to have some waiver. But bungee breaks, there's going to be a lawsuit. Yes.
I have two questions.
Sure.
So let's say there's some rogue hunter that crosses my fence. He's got a shotgun on a hair trigger, and his shotgun blows his leg off, which is clearly his fault. What kind of insurance do I want for that? And my other question is, let's say I have someone who wants to pick up some manure from my big round feeder because the cows have pooped the stump there for a while. Say, hey, go ahead and come pick some up. And they go onto my property through the hills and through the gates and everything. What are the two kinds of insurance that I want for
Those two exposures?
those two exposures? Yes.
You want liability insurance,
Okay.
which all policies will have. Farm or commercial. Yes.
I've been contacted by a daycare center who wants to bring their class to my farm on a weekly basis. They say they have insurance. Do I need any additional insurance on top of their insurance?
Yes. We could have quite a long conversation about that, but yes.
But that's part of that full disclosure. You just
Right.
tell your broker up front. and
Right.
then they-
Yeah, this is what I'm doing. I mean, in essence, you could say, well, provide me with an additional insurance certificate, which would be good. But I still think that the exposure is that they're coming onto your property. And you should have some liability insurance in case something happens. Yes.
This brings up a question. So how, when your clients in after some time, do you periodically set up to meet with them? Because the needs may evolve. So you may have this conversation up front, and then maybe what Lisa was doing 4 years ago has changed, and you periodically meet and say, so tell me what's going on. Oh yeah, I've got these kids coming once a week. Like, whoa, time out.
I'd like to tell you that kind of stuff never happened, but it happens all the time.
Is that
And
something
what-
part of your system?
Yes.
Or that people should expect in their insurance program?
Yes, they should be checking in with you, at least annually, if not more. Typically, you guys never hear from the insurance people until right before renewal anyhow. So. But that's what I try to do, and, to be honest, does that happen all the time? No, it doesn't. And what you're talking about has happened. You originally start with something very small that grows into something else, and then you find out about it, panic, and you got to kind of rework.